need 100% participation for this to work.
Yeah, everyone's here. All 12, 11. 11 of us. Well, what's the plan?
We're going to tell the whole world that he rose from the dead.
Oh, you know I'm in.
I love it already.
All right, classic. Then what?
And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
Wait. Come again. Could you go over that last part real quick?
Oh, what? We get murdered. What's the problem?
I like it. I like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Pete. What's in it for us? Do we all get riches, fame, and fortune first, right?
No, get this. You're going to be hated, persecuted, and reviled for the rest of your life.
Peter, you rock! Oh, okay, guys. Okay, and then what?
Then we all get killed. Come on. Fed to lions. Crucified upside down. Pierced by spears. Boogie. Stoned. And I don't mean the devil's lettuce. Stoned. And then clubbed to death. Stoned. And then beheaded. Drawn and quartered. Tied to train tracks. Beheaded. Have you ever heard of a Roman candle? Flayed alive. Burned alive. Cooked in boiling oil. Classic.
When do we see ourselves become exalted and praised?
That's just it. You don't!
Okay, you guys have officially lost it, okay? I am out of here. I'd rather be exiled to a deserted island than spend another minute with you wackos.
Have I got some good news for you?
This morning, though, we are beginning a series called Brave, which is our theme for camp this year. And very excited about that on Tuesday morning, about 250 students from second grade up to high school, along with several adult leaders, will be venturing off to just south of Charlottesville, Virginia, to be immersed in an environment inviting God to come in and to speak. And it's an incredible opportunity. And you think that's somewhere between a fourth to a third of our church is going away for this immersive experience. It was absolutely incredible, just to reflect on and to think. And so this is the topic that we'll be looking at camp, and so I thought it'd be good that if this week and then the week after camp, something we as a church were also kind of tracking with, so that way you might have some sense of what the students and leaders will be doing while they're there, as well as it's a, biblical value of just learning the scriptures and what it says about it. So the topic is brave. To be brave means to move forward in the face of fear. It's not the absence of fear, but rather it's accepting the fact that there is something that you're afraid of, and yet you have the courage to step into it, to face it with that kind of bravery. Now, oftentimes when we think about bravery, we think about somebody who has done something worthy of the Medal of Honor, or those instances where you've got a lone policeman who's the first to show up on a scene, and he enters into a situation where there's an active shooter or a fireman running into a burning building. Those are typically what we think of when we think about somebody who's brave. But we all have fears, and it's just as brave to face fears, whether it be the fear of rejection or the fear of failure or the fear that you're dealing with a real financial issue that's out there, or a health issue, or even death itself. Those are all real fears that also require a bravery to face them. Now, if you read through the scriptures, you'll see that there's something that Jesus taught to his disciples over and over and over again, which is fear not, or do not be afraid. Again and again, you'll see him say this. And then what you ultimately see as the narrative plays out, Jesus leaves, and then as the Babylon Bee sort of humorously I hope you don't take that as sacrilegious, by the way. I think if you look at it from the wrong perspective, but they accurately are sort of describing something that is so absurd to think about. And after all, many acts of bravery are almost absurd to think about it. I remember first definition I heard of courage when I was in fourth grade was from my fourth grade teacher who said that courage is doing something stupid and getting away with it. I can see where he was coming. He was saying, to go into a building with an active shooter is not a smart thing to do. But it takes bravery to do it. Think about what those early disciples did. They literally faced certain death to go and tell the world about what God had done through Jesus Christ. And it's incredible to think that they did it, every single one of them. John's the only one who didn't die a brutal death. That was the joke at the end if you didn't get that joke. And he dies in exile, basically on a island prison apart from everybody else. And that's where he writes the book of Revelation from. And so every one of them suffers greatly for having followed Jesus. And you just think about the bravery it took for that. But that didn't happen overnight. It happened over time. And we're going to kind of look at how sort of we got to that point. And it's from Jesus teaching again and again to fear not. Now, along with that, I got to bring up and address another thing. I don't know if you all have heard, there's a song by Zach Williams that's making the rounds on Christian radio and however we listen to music now, Spotify and whatnot, on playlists and whatnot, called Fear is a Liar. Anybody heard the song Fear is a Liar? Pretty good song. Except for the fact that, sometimes fear's not lying, right? If you're swimming and you see a shark, that fear ain't lying, right? If you up high and you rock climbing, now for you black folks, these are white activities. I understand that, right? They think fear's lying to them, but fear's not lying, all right? When you up real high, that fear is not lying, okay? If you're left in a room with 3 2-year-olds, that fear ain't lying. There are real fears. We're not talking about, I know there are other fears like what if I left the stove on? What if the house burns down? I don't know. Well, what if I didn't lock the door? Let me go check it one more time. What if... We have a lot of these what if fears, where fear is a liar. There's legitimately fears that lie to you, where you've got these what if scenarios that are so highly unlikely, so highly improbable. You're living your life from anxiety to anxiety, and you just need to settle down with that because, as Zach Williams would say, fear is a liar. But sometimes fear ain't lying. Okay, we got to acknowledge that. There are some things that are legitimate fears that you have to recognize. No, you should be afraid when that happens. That is a legit thing. Fear is a response to get you to do something else, not do that activity. So, when you go to these stories about where Jesus is saying fear is a liar, I think it's interesting to look at the context of them. The first one I want to look at is over in Matthew chapter 10. The setting for Matthew chapter 10, this is where Jesus says stuff about, wolves before sheep and many hairs on your head. A lot of these verses you know very well. Jesus says to them, do not fear. To begin with, he says, all right, now what we're going to do is we've been kind of a group up until now. We're going to split up into groups of 2. I'm going to send you out. All right, when I send you out, here's what's going to happen. Some of you guys are going to get arrested. Some of you guys are going to be flogged. That's where they take you, tie you up to a pole, and they whip you with a whip that's got pieces of bone or rock or wood in it that basically rip your flesh open. He says, that's going to happen to some of y'all. You're going to be called names. They've called me names. You're going to call you guys even worse names. Pretty much, there are going to be people from all over the world that hate you because of what you're going to do. Just know that on the front end. But don't be afraid. Now, let me pause for 1 second. He doesn't say in Matthew chapter 10, if you read it, these are things that could possibly happen. What's the worst that could happen, Jesus? Well, the worst that could happen is you might get arrested. That's the worst. Worst case. Worst case scenario, they arrest you and they whip you, all right? That's worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is you get run out of town. Worst case scenario, right? But what happens when somebody's telling you worst case scenario, right? It's not going to happen, right? We're going to take safety. When I learned to scuba dive, right? When you learn to scuba dive, it's pretty much a 10-week type course where they tell you all of the worst case scenarios, every bad thing that could possibly happen to you under the water, right? But the reason why we train is what? So that none of that happens, right? Jesus isn't saying these are worst case scenarios. He says it's an absolute certainty this is what's going to happen. And then he follows it up with, hey, but don't be afraid. Excuse me, come again? You just told me worst case scenario is going to happen. And then you said, don't be afraid. That doesn't sync up right. You just told me the very thing that I wouldn't want to have happen is going to happen. Oh, but don't worry. And so he goes on, he says, don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They can't touch your soul. Fear only God who can destroy both soul and body in hell. What is the price of 2 sparrows anyway? What's it, like a penny? Is that what the going rate is? But not a single sparrow can fall from the ground without your Father knowing it. And the very hairs on your head, all of them are numbered. That's not a very comforting thing for some of us. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, yes, but birds die every day, right? I mean, this happens every day. So what do you mean, don't be afraid of all of this? Well, this is a message, as I mentioned, he's tried to teach them again and again. Just 2 chapters earlier, he taught them this same message. And this is when they're out on one of the infamous boat rides that Jesus takes his disciples out on. And this is that one where he's out on the boat with his disciples, and they end up in a really bad storm, and waves are crashing over the boat, and Jesus is in the back sleeping. Now, although the text doesn't say it, I would almost propose that Jesus probably did this intentionally. He probably set out here and intentionally went to the back to sleep. I mean, I would think it's got to take some effort to sleep in a storm, right? And so he's intentionally back there asleep. Why? Well, I think for 2 reasons. One is he knows the task that he's going to call them to down the road, and he's got to give them some practical lessons of application about this do not fear thing. And then second of all, there's another aspect of it too, and that is, didn't y'all feel like as if when you cry out to God in the midst of your fearful moments, that God either doesn't hear you, isn't paying attention, doesn't care, is aloof? Sometimes maybe you question whether or not he's even there at all. And I think Jesus is giving us a vivid illustration of what we go through when we have the things that we're fearful in our life. And so the waves are crashing over the boat, and they go and they wake Jesus up. And the first thing Jesus says seems like the dumbest thing Jesus could possibly say. And he says, "Why were you afraid?" Did you not get the waves crashing over the boat thing? Now, if you've been out on a boat, it's a terrifying experience if you get in that stuff, right? I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. If you have a wave so big, it's not just like a boat going into big waves. The wave is literally crashing over the hull of the boat, which means likely one of 2 things is about to happen. That boat's rocking pretty hard and it is about to capsize. Or, best case scenario, it doesn't capsize, but you're going to have so much water in the boat at some point the buoyancy is going to give way and your boat's just going to sink. So when Jesus wakes up, and I'm just picturing like how much water is in the boat at this point, right? And the waves, the wind and stuff's still going on, and he looks at me and goes, "Why are you all afraid?" It's got to be about the dumbest question possible in that moment to ask them, "Why are you afraid?" Now, this is, of course, from our perspective, right? And then it says Jesus turns, and the way that the Greek language is, he turns and he says he rebukes the wind and the waves. It's the language you would use if a well-seasoned teacher, picture a teacher's been teaching 20-some-odd years, walks into a rowdy class and tells them to settle down. I'm talking the well-seasoned teacher. You're like, hey, settle down, everybody, settle down, everybody, quiet. And if you have certain kind of teachers who have that kind of respect, have that kind of authority, who've been there for long enough, and they know what they're saying, the tone of voice, and the kids just all of a sudden instantly, shape up and they sit in the seats and they listen. I don't know if that still happens, does it? I don't know, but that's the illustration I'm using, so go with it. Picture it's 1982, right? And the teacher says that, and the kids all settle down, and the winds and the waves literally just stop instantly. Now, in Matthew's account, he says the disciples were amazed. I I think more accurately is what you have over in the book of Mark. Mark's telling the same story in Mark chapter 4. And it says, the disciples were absolutely terrified. So it says they were afraid when the waves were crashing over the boat, but then when Jesus gets up and he talks to the wind and the waves like a school teacher talking to a rowdy class, and then the weather obeys, they were absolutely terrified. It says they feared a great fear. They feared a fear greater than fear is really kind of what the language is saying. And what the text is trying to show you in there is they started off being afraid of this thing here, but then they became even more afraid of that thing there. And that fear swallowed up that fear. Like, you ever have those things where you're afraid to do something, but you're more afraid of not doing it and what your dad's going to say if you don't do it, right? It's a bigger fear, right? Like, I'm afraid to, it's like, for me, one of those things was taking out the trash when I was a kid. I'd forget to do it during the daytime, and so at night I'd have to go out and take out the trash, in the night, in the dark. And if you're a kid, fear of darkness is, a very common fear. And so I was afraid to take the trash out because, we lived in a rough neighborhood there in that gated golf course community. So you never knew who was lurking behind the bushes. But you're scared to death, right? But you're more scared of going back in the house and saying, I didn't do it. And the disciples, they were afraid of the waves crashing over the boat, and now they're more afraid of somebody who is rebuking the weather and it obeys. And this is going to be a key point to take in. Now, then Jesus says, I'm going to send you out 2 by 2. Some bad things are going to happen. Don't be afraid. And then you get to Matthew chapter 14, and the beginning of Matthew 14 is kind of hysterical if you read through the beginning of it, and it says that Jesus insisted that they get in the boat. Okay. It's sort of, you can just picture like, hey guys, let's go for a boat ride. No. We've been with you in a boat before. I don't want to go for another boat ride. And was laughing about this was this past week, my son asked me, he's like, how come we never got a boat? How come, we live in Virginia Beach, there's water all around, you seem to like boats, we do, how come you never got a boat? And I said, because I hated boating growing up. I don't mind going on your boat, I don't mind going on a commercial boat, and it's not the cost, it's not the whole fact that boats break down, it's my boating experiences weren't good. Here's my boating experiences. Let's see, stranded on an island, bailing water out of a boat that was 25% full of water. More than once we were beached at low tide. Been in 8 to 10 foot seas in a 20-foot boat, so much so that we had a native Bohemian that literally lived on a small island and rode a boat to school, and she was terrified in the boat. That was fun. Been rescued by the Coast Guard, and had everybody on the boat medevaced after a wreck. And those are all different stories. Every one of those is completely different. Those were my boating experiences. So when my son says, hey, why don't we get a boat? No. And so I'm reading here, it says Jesus coerced them or forced them or pushed them to get into the boat. You can kind of see why, right? Because the last experience wasn't too good. And then to make it even better, he just, instead of getting in the boat with him, he just shoves them off and says, I'll catch up. Right? And then he goes off to pray. And sure enough, same thing happens again. They end up in a horrible storm. They're not getting anywhere. And once again, last time Jesus was in the boat, didn't seem like he cared. Well, now Jesus isn't even in the boat. So it's like he's taken the lesson. He had the lesson. He tried to illustrate the lesson, show him the lesson when he was there. He then tells him to go out. You're going to be out on your own. This is what's going to happen. And by the way, Matthew chapter 10 he's sort of foreshadowing not so much what's going to happen in Matthew 10, but what's going to be happening ultimately when he sends them out down the road. So he tells Matthew 10, here's what's going to happen. Then Matthew 14, he sort of gives them another lesson on do not fear, where he sends them out in the boat by themselves. And now they're thinking, not only does Jesus not hear us, he's not even here to hear us. But what they didn't understand, I didn't understand this fully, because when I thought of the Sea of Galilee, I thought of Lake Okeechobee. I grew up in South Florida. Virginia is very similar. It's very flat. And so when I heard how big the Sea of Galilee was, it's kind of similar in size to Lake Okeechobee. There's one major difference. Florida's flat, and there's no vantage point that you can see the whole lake from. The Sea of Galilee, though, is surrounded by mountains. And on top of any one of the small mountains around it, you can literally see the entire thing. It's one of the things we got to do over there as we hiked up Mount Arbel, and you could literally see from shore to shore, you could see every boat that was out there. And it gives you a picture of Jesus up on the mountainside praying, and he can look out and he can see, it says he saw the disciples struggling in the storm. And so what does he do? He does a Jesus thing and he walks out to them, sort of. Actually, it says he walked out past them. And he's like, "What's up?" And he keeps on walking. And they're freaking out. They didn't think he's, at first they were afraid of the wind and the waves. Now they're thinking they're seeing a ghost. Once again, another fear. And he says, "Guys, I keep on telling you, don't be afraid. It's me. It's me." And this is where Peter, comes out and that whole thing happens. So once again, Jesus is telling him, don't be afraid. Then you fast forward through the narrative, and Jesus tells him, listen, I'm going to get arrested. It's all going to go down. I'm going to give my life. That's what's going to happen. It's all going to go down. And after all these years of him telling him, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, there's a fear bigger than fear, you should be afraid of me and my power and God, not of all this other stuff. He then tells him what's going to happen, and it happens, and what do all the disciples do? Once again, they run in fear. Peter right there along with him, right? I mean, he, to the point where he's, a little girl asks him, "Hey, aren't you one of his followers?" And he freaks out at that. And he's like, no, I don't know him. So fear, 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 fear. But then you go over into the book of Acts and following, and you see that play out, which you saw in the opening clip. We're like, all right, here's the plan. We're going to go tell everybody about Jesus, and we're all going to get murdered for it. All right, let's do it. Now, I don't think that they were, running across the screen and cheering about the whole thing. Sort of. It says in the book of Acts that the first time they got whipped and beaten for telling the name of Jesus, they came away celebrating and rejoicing. So there actually is more truth to what you saw than what you would even think. And who does that? Why would they do that? Why would they then go and give their life like that? Where did the bravery come from? The lesson that they first learned on the boat, they finally fully grasped and personalized, and it became a part of them, and it sunk in a real way. Like they understood in a moment. You have those things where you can understand in a moment. Maybe you understand it theoretically or theologically, but you don't know it to the point where you're fully convinced of it. It's like they in that moment they had more fear of God and his power than of the circumstance. But then they struggled with that throughout the whole time. That's why Jesus keeps saying, "Are you guys still afraid? Are you guys still afraid? Have you not figured it out yet?" But then once they saw Jesus come back from the dead, there was something that clicked there. That I don't even have to be afraid of death. I'm following one who has conquered even death. And the only true fear that we should have is that of a fear of God. That you would have a fear that is greater than any other fear out there. I'm more afraid of disappointing God than I am of cowering down in front of someone. I'm more afraid of what God would think of me than I am what you would think of me. I'm more afraid of what God could do to my soul than I ever am of what man could do to my body. And it was this greater fear that they had that was what helped them overcome that fear. And so in a sense, where we begin with, looking at this story with the disciples is we ask, how does someone become brave? Do they just overcome their fear? The disciples would say, no, they found a fear that would replace that fear. A greater fear that replaces it. Why would a mother jump in front of something to save her child? Because the thought of me standing there and watching something happen to my child is a greater fear than me dying in that moment. And you begin to see that it's a fear that is greater. And coincidentally, I don't have time to come back around to this, but what are the three things that we see in Scripture about that should be hallmarks of our relationship with God? We should have faith in God, we should love God, and fear God. And you think, fear God, that sounds so opposite of what I would think with God. The reality is, though, there's a lot of things in this life that we fear. There's a lot of things that aren't lying about the fears that they hold. But there is a fear greater than any fear that you'll ever face in this life. It's a fear of being separated from the one who made you for all eternity. And Jesus says that's the only thing you should truly fear. Because this life is about nothing more than establishing a loving and growing and developing relationship with the one who made you, who wants to spend all eternity with you. We join us as we close our time in prayer. Father, I ask, Lord, that the lessons that Jesus taught the disciples, that they ultimately understood after your resurrection, would be one that truly sink in deep within our soul and move from theology into a practical daily living. There are many things in this world that are terrifying. Until we put life in the perspective of eternity. A 1,000 years from now, everything that we fear will all be gone. I mean, heck, the things I was afraid of last year aren't even there anymore. I can't even remember what I feared for 20 years ago. So may we take to heart, Lord, the only true thing to fear is standing before you someday not having a relationship with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.